All right, Jordan Peterson. I wasn't going to do a video on this, and then everyone and their mom made a video on this Jubilee debate that I was actually considered for. I was told my name came up, and for reasons that I don't know, I was not chosen for it. To be honest, I don't even know if I would have gone because I don't really love the format of these debates anyway, especially with someone like Jordan Peterson, where you need like a lot of time to really dig into something. But I do have a few thoughts on this Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists debate. Originally, it was titled 20 Atheists versus One Christian, but they changed it a few hours after the release because Jordan Peterson's Christianity was unlike anyone else's, and so they changed the title. But I do have a few thoughts that are different than everybody's like play-by-play of this debate that I just wanted to add to the conversation. So watch the debate and all the YouTube videos for the play-by-play that has been done to death. I'm not going to do that. Matt Dillahunty, I think, probably did my favorite kind of long video on it, going point by point. Even William Craig, whose voice I can't stand, the Christian apologist, made a video on it. And of course, there's like a million parody TikToks and memes making fun of Jordan Peterson things like, what do you mean by believe? What do you mean by think? What do you mean by happen? And like, those are funny, I'm not going to lie, but I'm going to do something that I haven't seen anyone else do, which is go to a deeper level and talk about why. Like, given what Jordan Peterson has shared about his own personal psychology and his own theology, why is he doing this? Why is he creating a definition of God that no one else really subscribes to, just God is your highest value, and Christianity, which he defines in this debate as taking up your cross and suffering for a greater good? Like, why define these terms in a way that no one else is using these terms? And no one's really going to that level talking about why. So in this video, I want to just like add a different perspective to the debate and post-debate discussion, which is why his fear of nihilism causes him to take the approach that he takes, which is something really under discussed when it comes to JP, because everyone will say like, good God, this word salad is so annoying, but nobody is talking about why he's doing it. So let me just summarize really quickly like what his major points were. And then we'll go into why I think he is approaching religion in this way and why it makes sense for his own psychology that he's shared. So his first point was that atheists don't understand the God that they're rejecting. He also adds in there that atheists are just people who have been hurt by religion and don't understand God. And then a few atheists got up who were like me, who have thought about God a lot and had considered very complex, nuanced versions of God for a long time. Harvard Divinity School is full of atheists, and these are people who take the idea of God very seriously. So even though, yes, there are young people that reject the Zeus in the sky God, like that does exist, that's such a caricature of what atheism is, because atheists outperform religious people in all the studies about religion or the Bible or religious history. They've usually done more thought about the concept of God than religious people, and so they take that question seriously. So to just say that everyone at like Harvard Divinity School, even though the head of Harvard Divinity School is an atheist, to just say that they don't understand God or they don't understand the God that they're rejecting, to me is just like a lazy argument to group those kinds of atheists with like the 13-year-olds who reject the Zeus in the sky God. Like, those are not the same thing. His next point was that morality and purpose cannot be derived from science and that ethics requires a metaphysical basis. That argument broke down later in the debate when Zena, who was amazing, she was the only debater worth listening to, honestly, challenged him by saying like, how do you know when the Bible is poetry or truth or history or morality? And he didn't have an answer for that. Like, he just said, we don't know. So even if your ethics derives from the Bible or metaphysics that are represented by the Bible, you still have to, he admitted, you still have to go through this very faulty human process of figuring out what is morality in the Bible and what isn't. So even morality that is grounded in the supernatural becomes a faulty human process too. So that argument just didn't hold up to scrutiny, especially when Zena was challenging him on that. And he said so many people, like including Sam Harris, challenge him by saying that empathy, conversation, rationality, and the science of human well-being, those four things together, will get us better morality than any kind of process that we're doing with the Bible. And so that one just kind of fell flat for me. His next argument was that everyone worships something. And this one I thought he did well defending. Like, I can give him this one. If you want to call worship your ultimate concern, which is how he defines it, yeah, sure, everyone worships something. Again, that doesn't mean that Christianity is true, so I don't think that gets him to where he wants to go. But sure, humans have highest concerns or devotions by how they choose to organize their time. Like, fine, take that one. And then his last point was atheists embrace Christian morality while rejecting its foundations. And this one I do think that you can defend as an idea. He observed that many secular individuals uphold moral principles that are historically rooted in Christian thought. And he highlighted kind of this inconsistency where you adopt the ethical standards while dismissing the roots of where they come from, the religious narratives that underpin them. And that's not an uncommon, that's not an uncommon approach. Even John Gray, the British atheist philosopher, says the same thing when he's critiquing secular humanism for being too Christian in its foundation, like the idea that the world should move towards utopia, or secular humanism has 10 commitments instead of 10 commandments. He sees this as still being very Christian. So that's not something that like just Jordan Peterson says. Many other people have remarked that secularism may have arisen in Christianity specifically because it focused on truth and seeking truth and the truth being good, which gave a foundation to be able to develop science and develop the Enlightenment, working towards the world being better, the development of moral ideas. Maybe there is a foundation of this that was practiced and harnessed in Christianity. And this came up also in the Sam Harris debate, and Sam Harris's retort still stands, which is, even if that is true, do you need to literally believe in the superstitions that gave rise to Christian morality in order to benefit from it now? And so JP is just really wary of separating the morality from the supernatural because he's afraid that to lose one is to lose the other. So he wants to keep the stories as true. He finally admitted to Alex O'Connor recently that he believes that Jesus actually rose from the dead. But it's mostly because he's afraid that if you lose the story, you lose the foundation of morality and the foundation of Western society too. So he acts as if the stories are true to hold the baby, to make sure that he's holding on to the baby in the bathwater there. So when JP says God is your highest good, and then at one point of the debate, he explicitly didn't call himself a Christian. And then he said a Christian is someone who takes up their cross and suffers willingly for a greater good. And then later he said there's maybe like 12 things that make you a Christian. And then you can be like 8/12 Christian without even having heard of Jesus or the Bible or having literal beliefs. And he says like Richard Dawkins is like this, like Richard Dawkins is mostly Christian in that way. And then Zena, who was the one who was most successful in debating him, said, how do we know what we're supposed to take out of the Bible as true? How do you know that your interpretation of what you're doing with the Bible is what the Bible intended? And he said, I don't know, but by your fruits you shall know them, meaning that his only indication that his version of God and Christianity may be true is because people find it helpful. People find it find enough nuance in space in his approach to religion to hold on to their faith. And so that then tells him that he's on to something and that he must be right. So because young men use his approach to religion to hold on to their faith in a postmodern world, he then believes there must be truth in what he's doing, which that doesn't work either, because of course there's all kinds of things that are helpful that are not ultimately true. So it's just all over the place how he's using these words. And what I want to do here is, instead of going like line by line, I want to go one level deeper and do a commentary of why is he doing this. And the first thing we have to understand about Jordan Peterson is his deep fear of chaos. At the heart of Jordan Peterson's worldview is this tension, and he talks about this every other sentence is something about this. It's this contrast between the tension of chaos and order. And this just isn't a philosophical theme for him. This is the central drama of his inner life. It spills out into his lectures, his books like Maps of Meaning and 12 Rules for Life, in every interview or debate he engages in. So he talks about chaos and order and uses this archetypal language. And chaos for him isn't just disorganization. It's like the terrifying unpredictability of life. It's the unknown, it's the void, and for him, it's also nihilism. But order, on the other hand, is structure and stability and meaning. It's the realm of logos, the word, the masculine, the domain of responsibility and truth. And so for Peterson, these aren't just metaphors, they're foundational opposites that define human experience. And he's deeply personally invested in keeping chaos at bay. It's not just intellectual for him. Peterson has openly said that he scores very high in trait neuroticism, which means psychologically he's much more sensitive to threat and disorder and chaos and uncertainty than the average person. And people with this trait often experience the world as dangerous or unstable. And so psychologically, they have to seek out rigid systems of understanding to help them feel safe to be able to function. So for Jordan Peterson, meaning making isn't just like a game that he's playing. It's not just an intellectual exercise. This is his survival strategy. He's trying to survive. So when Jordan Peterson talks about God, he's not talking about a bearded man in the sky that's like really easy to debate and kind of toss out. His concept of God is more abstract. It's more symbolic. He defines God as the thing that brings order out of chaos, or the process by which meaning emerges. In other words, it's not just about a supernatural entity. It's about something that can stabilize the soul in a world that's threatening and scary and unstable. And so his God is broad enough to be acceptable to rationalists and skeptics because he's redefining and nuancing so many things, but then it's also meaningful enough to serve a protective anchoring role in his own personal psychology. So what he's doing essentially is constructing a kind of mythological scaffolding, a carefully built symbolic structure to keep himself from falling into the abyss. And this is where, Carl Jung's influence on him becomes really clear. Jung believed that we all live on the edge of our own unconscious chaos, and that without a symbolic system or myth we're holding on to, we're at risk at being overwhelmed and collapsing. And Jordan Peterson just lives right on that edge. He's trying to create a system by which he, and then others by extension, can face life's terrifying ambiguity and death and nihilism without being destroyed by it. So when you see him reacting so emotionally to things like postmodernism, moral relativism, ideological chaos, he's not just intellectually disagreeing. This is like an existential alarm going off in his body that makes him very grumpy and very angry, because these things and these debates, they threaten the tearing down of order. And then you get the encroachment of chaos, something that he's trying desperately to build himself out of, not just for the world, but for himself. So because he has to work harder than everyone else to keep the chaos at bay, because he struggles with neuroticism and addiction and repressed anger and demons and fear of chaos, the chaos would consume him. He's then creating this system that is so intellectually complex and rooted in archetypes and changing these definitions to be broad enough to be true. He's using, Christian and God to make everyone basically a believer in God and everyone basically Christian. And by doing that, he can cling to this last place where faith can live, and he can keep the chaos at bay. That's the game that he's playing. The next aspect of this psychologically is his repression and his rage, which is what Gabor Mate talks about in regards to Jordan Peterson, because in this debate, he was grumpy and downright angry. And the difference between, for example, Alex O'Connor in debate in a similar format with Jubilee is that Alex doesn't need anything to be true. He can be calm and polite. And with the people afterwards, he went to dinner with them. He invited a few of them on the podcast, just like very lovely behavior, because Alex doesn't have this repressed rage that then projects out onto other people. But JP quit one of the debates and said, I'm done with him. And he was honestly grumpy with, the whole time. And what this means is that psychologically, this is emotional for him. And so one of the more striking moments in Peterson's public life came about during his conversation with Gabor Mate, when he noted that you have a lot of repressed rage, and Peterson didn't push back, and you could feel that comment like hit close to the bone. And if you've watched Peterson speak, especially when he gets emotional or defensive, that undercurrent of rage is really hard to miss. But this rage isn't about like political correctness or postmodernism. It's personal. It's his shadow. It's all the parts that he's trying to suppress or deny. And so for Peterson, whose identity is rooted in like discipline, clarity, intellectual control, the chaos and everything in his shadow is really threatening. And those emotions don't disappear. They just go underground and then kind of like burst out of him. And that's the thing with repression. These emotions don't vanish. They just leak out, and it emerges in him in these bursts of moral anger, these like sharp, passionate takedowns of ideologies that he sees as dangerous. But beneath the intellectual critique is something more existential. There's this fear that if these cultural forces win, that thin layer of order that he's clinging to might crack, and then all his fears will come to pass, both personally and, for the world. And so this dynamic also helps explain his appeal to disillusioned young men. Many of them carry their own unprocessed anger at the world, at their families, at themselves. And Peterson gives them a narrative to try to dignify their suffering and turn their pain into purpose. But what's missing is tools for actually dealing with the anger and the rage and the grief underneath, the part that doesn't just need rules. It needs to be seen and processed and felt and named. And so Peterson's breakdown, his battle with addiction and then full on, physical collapse, is part of that unprocessed shadow finally erupting. But then in classic Jordan Peterson fashion, even that suffering was folded back into a story of meaning. It's what he does best, building symbolic structure around his psychological collapse and his psychological fears and his existential terror. And in doing so, he survives it. But I'll always wonder that if he had more help and support for his repressed rage, which Gabor was like really sure was happening under the surface here, that maybe his fear, his existential fears, his fear of nihilism, if he could actually process some of these things more healthily, maybe he wouldn't be so angry at arguing with students a fourth of his age. Do you know what I mean? And this goes into his addictions too. When Peterson fell into benzodiazepine dependence and went through his kind of health crisis, it wasn't just a medical emergency. It was the collapse of the identity that he'd been trying to build, that he was a man of responsibility and order and self-mastery, and he lost all of that, and it was confusing and painful, and he was dependent on these drugs, and it shattered the narrative that he was living by, and we saw him just collapse in this. And so for someone whose worldview rests on the idea that meaning protects us from chaos, this descent into helplessness was more than just humbling. It was an existential crisis. He described it as being in hell, that it was hell, in all the ways that hell can be a hell. And it was the very chaos that he had spent his life trying to keep at bay, breaking through the cracks. And addiction often emerges when control fails and the internal tension becomes too much to bear. And it's not weakness, it's a signal that there's something beneath the surface that can't be contained anymore. And so for Peterson, the drive to maintain order, to intellectualize pain, to stay rational, it reached its limit. His body, in a way, forced him to feel what his mind had been trying to suppress and repress. And yet, in true Peterson form, he didn't let that collapse go to waste. He folded it back into a narrative. He really fell in love with the Jesus character all over again as someone who, is able to bear unbearable suffering. And so that's how he keeps his meaning alive. That even in his breakdown, if he remains loyal to the idea that pain, if carried properly, can be redemptive, then he can come out of hell, this own personal hell of living in his own brain. But it's also revealing because it shows how deeply his psyche needs that structure, and without it, how quickly he collapses, which is why he constructs God to be this ambiguous thing that means your highest value or your ideal good. And the best argument I've heard against that, against that game that he's playing is when Sam Harris said, it's like saying you believe in ghosts because you define believing in ghosts as having a relationship with the unknown. And it's like, well, yeah, I have a relationship with the unknown. And he'll be like, well, that's believing in ghosts. And it's like, yeah, if you move the definition so that it means that, then sure, everyone believes in ghosts, but you're really butchering what people mean when they say, do you believe in ghosts? Do you not believe in ghosts? Because you're trying to make this definition so broad that includes everyone and everything. So for someone who fears nihilism as much as Peterson does, abandoning God would be pulling out the final thread holding reality together. And I can empathize with that. That was my last thread too. Because he can't accept blind faith or supernaturalism. Like his intellect won't allow it. His level of education won't allow it. So he walks this tightrope of stretching the idea of God just wide enough to still believe in it, but in a way that won't fully collapse under scrutiny, because he can use all this archetype and history and Bible to try to support it. So this kind of God isn't just like a being, it's a process, it's a direction, it's a symbol of meaning itself. It's about orienting your life towards something higher, something stabilizing. And that elasticity is what makes it livable for Peterson. It's how he's holding on to the stabilizing power of religion without buying into literal belief, which is difficult to do. And so in a way, his God is less a conclusion. It's not really, to me, a really sound theology. When he speaks with theologians, his lack of education in theology really will shine through. It's a coping mechanism. All of this that you're seeing, it's a coping mechanism. And I think we can kind of humanize him a little bit in that. This is a psychological anchor that he's dressing up in metaphysics and his capacity for making word salads. And so he's doing this, though. Why? Because he knows the cost of giving up belief entirely. He sees what happens both in individuals and societies when meaning structures fall apart. There's a reason that JP studies dictators and darkness and shadow and nihilism, and why he knows a lot about Stalin and authoritarian regimes. He's afraid of that side of himself. And maybe he should be, because he does not do well psychologically with chaos, and he has a history of not doing very well with it. So he keeps the word God, but redefines it on his own terms in a way that no one else is using this word. And I don't think it's entirely dishonest. I don't think all of this is just like a show or for money or things like that. This is his survival strategy. His God is, if you can live it as if it's true, then that phrase "as if" is doing the heavy lifting. It allows him to function religiously without surrendering his rationality. But it also makes his position so fragile. And you can see that any time that he debates, his position is so fragile. And when it gets attacked, he starts getting angry because it's holding back the fragile scaffolding that's keeping him from falling into the black hole of the abyss. And so if that elastic version of God stops holding, what is he going to do? What's left of Jordan Peterson? Which brings us to Jesus, because as wild as his beliefs are of God are, I can kind of understand and sit with that. He's taking far more liberties with Jesus. When Peterson talks about Jesus, he often can't get it through tears. It's very emotional for him. But it's not about church or doctrine or salvation in the traditional sense. Even in this debate, when it came to like asking questions about belief or hell or salvation, he doesn't concern himself with any of these questions. He just really doesn't give a shit about any of that. It's Christ as archetype, specifically the one that takes on the unbearable burden of suffering voluntarily. And for Peterson, that's not just admirable, it's essential. It's his only way through the void. So Jesus is the image of the kind of person that Peterson needs to be, someone who doesn't collapse under suffering, but carries it with dignity for a greater purpose, someone who says yes to life even when it's unbearable. That idea itself, regardless of the historical claims of Jesus and the supernatural claims of Jesus, that idea itself saves him, not just spiritually, psychologically. And so for Peterson, the weight of carrying your own cross is very real to him. You can hear it in his voice. You can see it in his face. He's still carrying this cross. And you get the sense of him being terrified of what would happen if he put down his cross. And so in the end, Peterson's relationship to Christianity isn't about belief in the supernatural. He's not a theologian. When he gets into talking about theology, it gets really muddled, and the scholarship, it's just obvious, like he hasn't been trained as a scholar in theology. This is about survival. It's about having a story strong enough to hold together when everything else falls apart. And whether or not you agree with him, there's something deeply human in that. He's not clinging to God because he's sure, or because he has a degree in the Bible. It's because the alternative to him is the abyss, and the abyss could actually destroy him. So here's my issue with it for him in the world, even though I can understand that deeper human level and even have some compassion for that. I really can. Because I've been to the abyss and I have psychologically broken down because of it. And I'm high in neuroticism too. I get it. Like, it is something to fear for that personality type. I get that. But the game that he's playing is such untenuous ground. It's not the approach that leads to inner peace and stability. You can see it in his anger. He has to fight so hard to use enough complexity to keep the system going. And you have to ignore the ways that he's blatantly using the Bible in a way that the Bible is not claiming for itself. Dan McClellan has called out Jordan Peterson a dozen times on various ways that he's reading things into the text that are just not there. So rather than have inner peace after nihilism, he has to engage with this daily battle to make God and Christianity in the Bible into something sustainable. And that's a battle that sometimes he loses. And all of this to say, this is the real deep question in regards to Jordan Peterson. This is the real question. If he cannot handle the void, if going into chaos and losing God and facing it the way that I talk about on this channel, if he is psychologically dealing with such neuroticism and repressed rage and destabilizing fear of chaos that losing God is going to end up with him in addiction and breakdown and death, if that's what would happen to him because of the level of psychology we're talking about, is it better then that he keeps doing what he's doing? And for this question, I'm setting aside like his political views and everything else he talks about. I'm only talking about his religious views. Is it better that he's helping young men put on a suit and take responsibility and clean your room and all of that, then the alternative, if he really can't handle the chaos that comes with accepting that there is no God and all of this is human? Because one of my fears with my work and trying to give nihilists tools to face the void without God, without grounding morality into something objective, without raising kids in religion, without faith, without Jesus, my fear with that is, what about the people who actually won't survive it? Is it better to lose people along the way so that collectively we can outgrow God? Or is it better that people like Jordan Peterson, who deeply psychologically struggle with chaos, find ways to construct meaning even if it isn't true, for all those who also struggle with constructing meaning? That's the question that I'm thinking about with JP. Not if his conception of God is true, not if his approach to the Bible is accurate. That has absolutely been blown apart by real biblical scholars. Not his holding on to Christianity as if it's a construct that can hold literally everything else. Like, he puts all other religions into the system of Christianity, even though we've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years before Christianity. He tries to make Christianity the framework that holds all of it. None of that is convincing to me. None of it. It almost reminds me of when I was in open and relational theology, clinging to the last scraps of a God so nuanced that it required gold medals and mental gymnastics because of my own fears of losing God and falling into the void. The real question, because none of that is convincing, the real question is, if he can't survive the death of God, is it better that he keeps doing this game that he's playing? Or is he, with the platform he has and all the work with Christianity that he's doing, is he preventing us from going through the growing pains of the death of God so we can make it to the other side? Because for me, even though the void was terrifying and not good for my neuroticism, building without God became stable ground, even though it felt unstable at first and it was hard at first. And I don't experience the anger that he does, or the temptation to addiction, or the mental gymnastics. I also don't get like irrationally mad at people who don't see the world the way I do, because when we build on human things, like all the good stuff he's trying to hold on, ritual and awe and beauty and art and all these things, If we can accept that they are human and not supernatural, it takes less work to cling and hold on to it. The downside is that you have to face it, that the universe doesn't care, that God is dead, that morality arises from evolution of social creatures, that you will die, that Jesus isn't coming for us, that we don't have free will, that most things suffer for most of the time. And the question is, how many people can actually psychologically face that? And if they can't, is it better that they find some kind of order and structure, even if it is a word salad of Jungian archetypes that you're reading into the Bible when you're not a biblical scholar? Is it better that you're doing that than the alternative? That's the question that I'd love to know what you think about, because that's the question that I'm thinking about in regards to this debate. So that's what I have to add to the Jordan Peterson conversation. And after this, I just want to forget that this debate ever happened, except for Zena, who actually also just debated Charlie Kirk as well. And she is one to watch. She actually debated like a philosopher. And when I mean that, I don't mean like there's a difference between dude bros quoting philosophy to each other and actually like the heart of philosophy, which is asking the right questions. And she did that. She asked the right questions. She allowed him to explain his position. And then she asked the right question to get Jordan Peterson to shift or even admit, I don't know. Like at one point he said, that's the end of what I can say about this. I can't answer your question. That's the end. And even at the end of the video, some of the other atheists, the guys, recognized that she was able to get further by letting him talk and explain himself and asking the right questions that got to the root of the matter. And they admitted that they learned something from the way that she debated him. She was fantastic. I follow her now on TikTok, and she's really one to watch. So another interesting side note, this is totally off subject, but in a TikTok video where I was briefly talking about this, I did call her homegirl, and I meant it in the sense that she's my girl because she debated so well and she's a fellow female atheist. And I did say her name later on in the video, that her name is Zena. I praised her multiple times. And in my comment section, a fight broke out between white people telling me I was racist because she is Black by calling her homegirl. And then Black people in my comment section were saying, calm down. That's not offensive. Like, you guys are just like really virtue signaling here. Like, it's not offensive to just call someone homegirl. So it was interesting that, like, as a side note, there was a racism discussion in my comment section over whether or not I was being racist by calling her homegirl, which is a phrase that I have used before, not just for Black women. We say she's my girl, or like girl, or she's my homegirl. So I'm watching that debate happen because my gut reaction is that that isn't inherently racist. But I also know that I can be wrong about internalized racism and classism and sexism and ableism and all the isms. So I'm just thinking about it, and I'm open to critique on that one. But it was really interesting to watch white people say that it was racist and Black people in that post saying that it was not. And that was really interesting to watch. So let me know what you think about this one. That's my take on JP. Hopefully he doesn't say anything for a while and I can move on to talking about other stuff. Next week, I'm going to be doing NDEs. And I know a lot of people are going to get real mad at me over it, but let's really go into near-death experiences, and I will see you then.